Queens of Jazz: Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, and Nina Simone. In the late early 1900s, Black communities in New Orleans, Louisiana, married African rhythms and European harmonies, and gave birth to a new form of music, jazz. It is the art form which perhaps best exemplifies the melting pot that is American culture. And jazz, in turn, delivered many new genres, including rock and roll, funk, reggae, R&B, and hip-hop. Among the many legendary jazz musicians, 3 women stand out. Their lives and struggles paint a vivid picture of what it is like to be a woman in show business and a Black person in America. And their artistic genius continues to inspire people across the globe. Let's meet the Queens of Jazz: Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, and Nina Simone. Billie Holiday was born Eleanora Fagan on April 7, 1915. Her teenage mother, Sadie, was kicked out of her home. Her father was a traveling banjo player and abandoned them. Sadie found a service job on the railroad and left her daughter with family for months at a time. At 9, Eleanora was brought before the juvenile court for skipping school. She was sent to a Catholic reform school, where nuns punished her by locking her in a room with a dead girl overnight. For years to come, she woke up screaming from bad dreams. She was released to her mother, but one night, Sadie came home to find a neighbor assaulting her daughter. They fought him off, and he was arrested. But Eleanora was sent back to the reform school for a year of protective custody. After her release, she worked as a cleaner in a brothel. She loved to listen to the records of Louis Armstrong and Bessie Smith on the Bordello's Victrola. Mother and daughter moved to Harlem, New York, and both did sex work. Eleanora was arrested and sentenced to 4 months on notorious Roosevelt Island. After her release, she began auditioning to sing in speakeasies. She took the stage name Billie Holiday after silent film star Billy Dove, and her father, Clarence Halliday, whom she reconnected with, though both changed the spelling to Holiday. Fun fact, Billie inspired my own nom de plume. When Billie was 18, legendary producer and member of the Vanderbilt family, John Hammond, came to hear her. He was blown away and arranged for her to make a record with Benny Goodman. Riffin' the Scotch was her first hit. Before the invention of microphones, singers had to project loudly and exaggerate. Billie didn't have the vocal range or power of an operatic diva, but she put new, more nuanced microphones to her advantage with a subtle and intimately emotional style. She cultivated the persona of a woman unlucky in love and sang with palpable heartbreak, something that audiences had never seen before. So the next time you're moved to tears when your favorite star lays down an impassioned ballad, remember, Billie did it first. She was signed to Brunswick Records and sang pop tunes with pianist Teddy Wilson for the new invention, the jukebox, including What a Little Moonlight Can Do. But the label wanted her to sound more like other popular singers. When they finally allowed her to use her own style, I Cried for You was a massive hit. She took to wearing gardenias in her hair and was nicknamed Lady Day. At the time, big bands were all male but had female singers, which is why most of the early Queens of Jazz were vocalists. Billie joined Count Basie's band, hoping to see the world, but she was disappointed to spend all of her time on a bus and all of her small paycheck on clothes and hair for the show. They played rough dance halls and riffraff joints and faced constant racism. In Detroit, a manager insisted Billie darken her face. Back in New York, she recorded hits including Summertime and They Can't Take That Away From Me. Billie was outspoken within Basie's band about how and what she sang, so she was fired for being too temperamental. She was immediately hired by Artie Shaw. It was rare to see a Black singer touring with a white band, and Billie had a difficult time, especially in the segregated South. She often had to sleep on the bus while the rest of the band stayed in a hotel. When she faced heckling, Artie and other band members stood up for her, even getting into fights. At a hotel in New York City, Billie was asked to use the service elevator after guests complained. That was the last straw, and she quit Artie's band. She was now a well-established recording artist, and I'm Gonna Lock My Heart was one of the biggest hits of 1938. Her father, Clarence, was touring Texas when he fell seriously ill with a lung infection. He was refused treatment at several white hospitals, and by the time he made it to a black ward, pneumonia had set in. He died at 39. Billie was deeply affected and began singing Strange Fruit. Her powerful performance evoked unsettling imagery, comparing lynched African Americans to a bitter harvest of fruit. At least 4,084 Black men, women, and children were victims of lynching in the South between 1877 and 1950. Billie feared retaliation for her musical protest, and Columbia refused to record the song, but Commodore released it, and the poignant tune sold over 1 million copies. It also helped to galvanize the civil rights movement. Billie recorded many popular songs by other writers, including I'll Be Seeing You and Embraceable You, but her own most famous composition was inspired by a fight with her mother. Billie financially supported Sadie's restaurant, Mom Holidays. But when Billie herself fell on hard times and asked for money, her mother turned her down. They fought, and Billie yelled the Bible verse, God bless the child that's got his own. She used the line to write another hit. At 26, Billie married trombonist Jimmy Monroe, and together the couple began using heroin. She wrote Don't Explain after finding lipstick on his collar. Despite her tumultuous personal life, her star continued to rise. She recorded Lover Man and Crazy He Calls Me, and appeared in a major motion picture, New Orleans with Louis Armstrong, but the studio insisted that the film be re-edited to avoid the impression that Black people invented jazz. Many of Billie's scenes hit the cutting room floor. She had an affair with her dealer, trumpeter Joe Guy, and her addiction affected her work. She divorced Jimmy and married Joe. She also had affairs with Charles Loughton, Tallulah Bankhead, and Orson Welles while he was filming Citizen Kane. While in LA, Clark Gable took her out for a drink, and when a drunk insulted her, the movie star punched him. When she was heckled during a performance, comedian Bob Hope stood up in the crowd and insulted the man until he left. Then he and Judy Garland met Billie backstage with champagne. In 1947, her drug use finally caught up with her. She arrived back at her hotel to find police swarming the lobby. She tried to drive away, but they shot at her car. In the case of the United States of America versus Billie Holiday, her lawyer did not show up to court. Desperate, she pled guilty and was sentenced to a year in prison. She spent her time knitting and making whiskey from potato peels. Upon her release, she tried to sneak back into New York, but her dog, Mister, greeted her enthusiastically, causing a scene in Penn Station. Others were less welcoming. Her good friend Sarah Vaughan refused to acknowledge her, but Lena Horne rushed off stage to hug her and welcome her back. Billie's manager arranged a comeback concert at Carnegie Hall, and she broke the venue's sales record. During the show, someone sent up gardenias. She was so touched that she pinned them in her hair on the spot. She didn't realize she'd stuck her scalp with hairpins until blood started dripping in her eyes. After the third curtain call, she passed out. Most musicians of the time were given very unfavorable record contracts. Billie was paid next to nothing in royalties while her label raked in cash, reprinting her popular records. She counted on income from gigs. But after her conviction, she lost her license to perform at venues that served alcohol, and her songs got very little radio play because of her negative reputation. In 1952, Billie appeared on the ABC reality series The Comeback Story and discussed attempts to overcome her drug use, drinking, and relationships with abusive men. Improved technology allowed her to record entire studio albums. She laid down 12 in 6 years. She made 2 successful tours of Europe and released an autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues. But her addictions got in the way of her art. Her voice became hoarse and she lost range. In 1957, Billie married Louis McKay. He was a mob enforcer and, like most of the men in her life, was abusive. They were separated by the time she fell seriously ill with cirrhosis of the liver. She lost 20 pounds and her friends begged her to go to the hospital. When she finally did, NYC police showed up, and after finding narcotics, which may have been planted, they placed Billie under arrest. A guard was stationed outside her hospital room. Frank Sinatra, who called her the most important influence on American popular singing, visited her deathbed. Billie Holiday died on July 17, 1959, of pulmonary edema and heart failure. She was 44, and the last $750 to her name was found strapped to her leg. Fans paid for her funeral and offered to erect a headstone fit for a queen of jazz, but her estranged husband insisted on burying her on the cheap in out-of-the-way St. Raymond's Cemetery in the Bronx, next to her mother. Lady Day's public image grew exponentially after her death. She was awarded 23 posthumous Grammys. In 1972, Diana Ross was nominated for an Oscar for the biopic Lady Sings the Blues. In 2021, Andra Day portrayed her in The United States versus Billie Holiday. Ella Fitzgerald was born on April 25, 1917, in Newport News, Virginia. Her parents were mixed race and unmarried. By the time Ella was 6, they had split up, and her mother moved with her new partner to Yonkers, New York. Ella got a half-sister, Frances. Ella did exceptionally well in school and enjoyed singing and dancing in church. She loved listening to Louis Armstrong, Bing Crosby, and the Boswell sisters. When she was 15, her mother died after a car crash. Her stepfather abused her, and she left to live with an aunt in Harlem. Ella began skipping school and working as a lookout for a brothel and running numbers for the mob. The authorities placed her in an orphan asylum. She escaped, but feared they would find her at her aunt's house. So she lived on the streets of Harlem and sang and danced for money. In 1934, 17-year-old Ella showed up to amateur night at the Apollo. She had intended to dance, but was intimidated by a duo of sisters in feathers and sequin costumes. When Ella stepped onto the stage in her disheveled street clothes, the audience didn't expect much. But when she opened her mouth, the original Susan Boyle blew them away. She belted out Judy and The Object of My Affection and won first prize, $50. But gigs came slowly. Most female singers were hired for their looks as much as their voice. Band leader Chick Webb was convinced that the gawky, unkempt teenager was a diamond in the rough. He invited her to perform at a Yale University dance as a trial. The audience loved her, and she was hired. Chick and his wife became Ella's legal guardians and helped her with clothes, makeup, and hair. She was shy and quiet and didn't get pulled into her bandmates' shenanigans. They called her Sis. When her first record, Love and Kisses, was released, a doorman wouldn't let her into a club to hear it because she was underage. She offered a stranger money to play it on the jukebox, and she leaned against the door, marveling at her own voice. Her biggest hit was her own arrangement of the nursery rhyme A Tisket a Tasket, which spent 19 weeks on the hit parade and was one of the best-selling records of the 1930s. Ella's voice was a fine-tuned instrument. She had a 3-octave range, pure, silky tone, and impeccable diction. She was also gifted at improvisation and scat, key elements of jazz. Along with Chick's band, Ella became a fixture at the famous Savoy Ballroom. There, the good girl of jazz found herself going head-to-head with the bad girl of jazz, Billie Holiday. Ella won their 1938 Battle of the Bands. Afterwards, she asked for Billie's autograph, but jealous Billie turned her down. The two divas did eventually become friends. In 1939, her mentor, Chick, died of spinal tuberculosis. Now 22 and already known as the First Lady of Song, she took over the band, which was renamed Ella Fitzgerald and Her Famous Orchestra. She performed 2 songs in the Abbott and Costello film Ride 'em Cowboy. In 1941, Ella married stage door Johnny, Benny Corngay. He was a petty criminal, and her band of big brothers couldn't believe she'd fallen for him. The marriage ended in a year. She won her band's approval when she married Ray Brown, a bassist for Dizzy Gillespie. Ella's sister Frances gave birth to a son, but she couldn't care for him, so Ella and Ray adopted the boy and named him Ray Jr. But their careers always came first, and they left little Ray in the care of family while they toured the world. In the second half of the 1940s, swing and big band fell out of fashion in favor of bebop. Ella launched her solo career and evolved her style, incorporating more scat to great acclaim. She first appeared at Carnegie Hall in 1947. She did guest appearances with Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Dizzy Gillespie, and more. She signed with Decca and recorded 8 studio albums. But she was continually denied a radio show because she was black. She was also criticized for her appearance and called matronly by Ebony magazine. After spending more time apart than together, Ella and Ray called it quits in 1953, but remained friends. While performing with jazz at the Philharmonic, Ella hit it off with the producer, Norman Gantz, and formed the most important business relationship of her life. He became her manager and made sure her contract stipulated that she was paid the same as white and male headliners, and that she would not perform in front of segregated audiences. If venues were discovered selling tickets unfairly or seating black patrons in the back, Ella and her band still got paid but didn't play. This stance wasn't without conflict. In South Carolina, an irate crowd chased Ella and her band back onto their bus and out of town. While on their way to Australia, Ella and her entourage boarded a plane in Honolulu with first-class tickets, but they were ordered by Pan Am employees to exit the plane without their luggage. They were stranded for 3 days. Pan Am denied that the incident was racially motivated, but Ella filed a civil discrimination suit and won. Once the Queen of Jazz finally arrived, the Australian tour was a smashing success. Norman founded Verve Records, and Ella made 30 albums with him. Many of her best-known hits came from this collaboration, including It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing, They Can't Take That Away From Me, and Mac the Knife. She also recorded 3 duet albums with Louis Armstrong, and the Christmas classic, Baby It's Cold Outside. Ella recorded 8 songbook albums, highlighting composers including Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, and Johnny Mercer. In her Duke Ellington songbook, the Duke himself played piano. The New York Times wrote, "Here was a black woman popularizing urban songs often written by immigrant Jews to a national audience of predominantly white Christians." In 1955, Ella's superfan, Marilyn Monroe, lobbied the owner of the Mocambo nightclub in Hollywood to book the songstress. It has long been reported that the owner was hesitant because of Ella's race, but other black entertainers had already performed there. In reality, Ella was held back because of her size and lack of glamour. But Marilyn sat in the front row at every performance, drawing massive crowds and skyrocketing Ella's fame. Ella had a romance with a younger Danish man, Thor Larsen, and they may have secretly married. She bought a house in Copenhagen, but Thor turned out to be a petty criminal and they split. After that, she gave up all semblance of a personal life. She barely knew her son. While attending his wedding, she was surprised to see the bride walking down the aisle was white. In 1961, she performed at John F. Kennedy's inaugural ball. Through the 60s, 70s, and 80s, she spent 40 to 45 weeks a year touring, doing 2 shows a night with few days off. While other stars of her era fell out of fashion, Ella kept things contemporary by covering popular songs, including the Beatles. The Rolling Stones snuck in to watch her record and were starstruck. She made numerous guest appearances on television variety shows, including The Frank Sinatra Show, The Carol Burnett Show, and The Andy Williams Show. She performed with Nat King Cole, Dean Martin, Mel Torme, and Karen Carpenter. She also appeared in commercials for Memorex, American Express, and Kentucky Fried Chicken. In 1984, she received an NAACP Image Award for her civil rights work. In 1987, she was awarded the National Medal of Arts and the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Ronald Reagan. In the late 80s, Ella's ethereal voice began to fade. She was plagued by diabetes, congestive heart failure, exhaustion, and she was going blind. She made her last recording in 1991 and her last public performance in 1993. That year, both of her legs were amputated. Her decades of hard work netted her $10 million, and she was content to finally rest and reconnect with her son and granddaughter, Alice. She also established the Ella Fitzgerald Charitable Foundation. On June 15, 1996, Ella died in her home of a stroke at 79. She had a private funeral and was buried at Inglewood Park Cemetery in California. Nina Simone was born Eunice Kathleen Wayman on February 21, 1933, in Tryon, North Carolina. Her father was a barber and her mother a Methodist preacher. Eunice was the sixth of 8 children. She began playing piano at the age of 3 and developed an abiding love of classical music. At 12, she gave a recital, and her parents, who were sitting in the front row, were told to give up their seats to a white couple and move to the back. Eunice refused to perform until her parents were restored to the front row. Her music teacher established a scholarship to send her to a girls' high school in Asheville. She graduated valedictorian in 1950, and the community raised money to send her to a summer music program at Juilliard in New York. She auditioned for the more affordable Curtis Music School. Her family moved to Philadelphia in anticipation of her acceptance, but Eunice's application was rejected. Though the school denied it, she always felt it was a case of racial prejudice. Instead, she worked as an accompanist and taught piano to pay for private lessons with a professor from Curtis. One of her students told her that they were making $90 a week playing at a bar. Eunice jumped at the chance and got a regular gig at Midtown Bar and Grill in Atlantic City. The bar's owner didn't care for her classical piano and insisted that she sing and play more popular tunes. So she mixed her beloved classical music with jazz, blues, folk, rock, and pop to create a unique sound that drew a small but dedicated fan base. She knew that her mother would not approve of her playing the devil's music, so she performed under a stage name, Nina from the Spanish for girl, which was a nickname from a boyfriend, and Simone from French actress Simone Signoret. In 1958, she married beatnik drummer and carnival barker Don Ross, but quickly regretted it and filed for divorce. That year she made her first recording, I Loves You Porgy, from the musical Porgy and Bess, which was popularized by Billie Holiday. It was her only Billboard Top 20 in the U.S. She signed with Bethlehem Records and made her first album, Little Girl Blue. She didn't care about becoming famous and saw pop music as only a means to fund her classical training. So without reading the contract, she signed away her rights to the recordings and was paid only $3,000 up front. She missed out on at least $1 million in royalties from the popular album. However, the success allowed her to negotiate better terms on a contract with Colpix Records. She was given total creative control and recorded 8 live and studio albums. She moved to New York and was booked regularly in Greenwich Village. In 1961, she married police detective Andrew Stroud, and they had a daughter, Lisa. Andrew became her manager. He helped to expose her to a wider audience, arranged international tours, and calmed the artist's darker impulses. But he was also abusive, controlling, and treated her like a workhorse. In 1965, Nina recorded one of my all-time favorite songs, I Put a Spell on You. The tune was written and popularized by rock musician Screamin' Jay Hawkins, but Nina made it her own with swelling strings and haunting vocals. Nina had always channeled her African American heritage through her music. She was friends with many of the great Black intellectuals of the day, including Lorraine Hansberry, Langston Hughes, and James Baldwin. In 1963, the murder of civil rights activist Medgar Evers and the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, that killed 4 girls, infuriated and galvanized her to vocalize her frustration. Mississippi Goddamn was the first of many civil rights songs she penned. The single was boycotted in the South, and a Carolina radio station smashed her records. Still, she persisted in her activism. She performed and spoke at several protests, including the Selma to Montgomery marches. She felt that Martin Luther King's nonviolent approach was too slow and favored Malcolm X's call for revolution and Black nationalism. But after King's assassination, she dedicated a performance of Why, the King of Love is Dead to him. She also wrote and performed Young, Gifted, and Black. Her outspoken stance hurt her career, and she refused to pay taxes in protest of the Vietnam War. By 1970, she was fed up with the music industry and the state of America, and she left for Barbados. Her sudden departure and leaving her wedding ring behind led her husband to assume she wanted a divorce. As her manager, he retaliated by canceling contracts and keeping her income from her. When she returned home, she found that there was a warrant out for her arrest for tax evasion. She left the U.S. for good and returned to Barbados, where she had an affair with Prime Minister Errol Barrow. Nina then moved to Liberia and invited her daughter, Lisa, now 10, to join her. They later migrated to Switzerland. But Nina was emotionally volatile and abusive, and Lisa moved back to New York to live with her father. In the 1970s and 80s, Nina recorded occasionally and saw limited success. She performed regularly at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club in London and recorded an album there. In 1987, My Baby Just Cares for Me, a track from her first album back in 1958, was featured in a European commercial for Chanel No. 5 perfume. The song was re-released and hit No. 4 on the UK charts. Though she didn't see any money from it, she enjoyed a resurgence in popularity and more bookings. She settled in Paris and was a fixture at a small local basement nightclub. She loved to sing in French. She made only $300 a performance and had to sell her furniture and jewelry to make ends meet. Her mental health declined. Her performances were sometimes brilliant, and sometimes she was too drunk to play and scolded the audience. Concerned friends convinced Nina to take a break and move to the Netherlands. A caretaker was hired to look after her. Nina had frequent outbursts of temper and aggression, which were finally diagnosed as bipolar disorder. Early medication helped, but also affected her motor skills, making it difficult for her to play piano. Still, it was a happy time for her. She was rarely recognized and lived a quiet life, and her mental health improved. She sued for royalties from the Chanel commercial and won. In 1993, she moved to the south of France and recorded her last album, A Single Woman. She had a short but blazing affair with a younger Tunisian man. Nina's vast body of work hit a resurgence in popularity in the US, but she was unaware until an interviewer asked her about it. During her last visit to America in 1998, she announced, "If you're going to come see me again, you've got to come to France, because I am not coming back." In her final years, Nina suffered from breast cancer. She died in her sleep on April 21, 2003, at the age of 70. Her funeral was attended by hundreds, including Miriam Makeba, Patti LaBelle, and other celebrities and musicians. Nina's ashes were scattered in several African countries. Her musical talents live on in her daughter, Lisa. She was an understudy in the original Broadway cast of Rent and played Mimi in the first national tour. She also played the title role in Aida and Nala in The Lion King and has released 6 albums. In 2016, Zoe Saldana portrayed the jazz legend in the biopic Nina. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.